And Maria, would you like to take it away?
Can I bleep that up? Oh,
Hello! That looks wonderful with the wings behind you.
I have wonderful wings. Thank you, John. I wondered when someone would notice. So they're all just invisible sometimes. Anyway, hello.
Yeah.
Give me
We love you.
Just give me a quick wave if you can hear me. Wave at me. Wave at me. Oh, thanks. Hello. I've got multiple amounts of tech going on. I'm talking to you through my phone, but I can see you on my laptop. So if I look off to the side, I'm not looking at my notes. I'm looking at you, and I can see you all smiling at me, which is wonderful. So we're going to have a whole selection of stories this evening about animals, because not only am I a storyteller, I'm actually a zoologist. So we're going to have a few tales about animals from around the world, real animals, imaginary animals, things that might not seem like they've got anything to do with animals, but they have. We're going to have a few riddles, and I'll tell you some interesting stuff. So are you ready for a story? Nod vigorously at me now. Vigorous nodding, excellent. So before we go any further, I kind of need to see what kind of audience we have, because as you and I both know, there are two sorts of people in this world. There are cat people and there are dog people. So before we go any further, just to gauge what kind of dog owner, can you give me a lovely wave now? Do you know what? I've got a whole set of people going like this, and they're really excited and their tails are wagging and they're very eager to please, which is lovely. Hello, dog people. If you are the other sort of person, if you're a cat person, can you give me a wave if you are owned by a cat now? Yes, the cat people are doing a kind of royal wave. They're not really bothered about this, but they'll see how it goes. I think we should probably start with a story about cats, and I'm going to start with the biggest, or one of the biggest cats there are, and I'm going to tell you the story of how the tiger got its stripes. They didn't always have stripes, you know. They started off with the most magnificent, glorious, glowing orange pelt, and they looked so fabulous and they were so proud. It wasn't the peacock that was the proudest animal in the jungle. It was, in fact, the tiger. And this is the story of how that beautiful coat got its stripes. Tiger was sitting on the edge of the forest and he was watching carefully. He was a cat, they're very good at that. And the thing he was watching was quite confusing, and he was pondering. He could see not too far off in the distance a huge tree, and tethered beneath this tree there was a water buffalo, a vast animal, and it was just stood quietly with a rope tethered around its neck, chewing the cud. And Tiger had been watching all day, and he'd seen what had happened. And this vast, powerful animal had worked hard in the hot sun all day long, following behind the plough. And he was led by another creature, a small, puny creature that lay in the shade just a further away, a man. And Tiger could not understand what was going on. He looked back at this vast water buffalo, and it shook its shaggy head to get rid of a fly, and it huge horns. I'll have to be careful of those, thought the tiger. And he began to stalk. And he stalked through the long grass, and he got closer and closer to the buffalo, silent as the grave. He got just within reach of the buffalo, and the buffalo's head snapped up as it smelt the danger on the air. There's nothing for it. The tiger bunched up its muscles and it sprang. Shh, said the tiger, calm down. If I'd wanted to eat you, you stupid animal, you would be dead by now. I've come to talk to you. I can't understand what's going on. Why are you letting yourself being led up and down that field with the heat shimmering from your back by that tiny man? You're 10 times the size of him and you are 100 times the strength of him. Go on, what is it? What is his secret? How can he manage to have you in bondage and make you work for his profit? What's the man's secret? And the water buffalo said, I don't know, really. I don't understand it myself, to tell you the truth. But I know I'm never going to be out of his power, because he's got this thing. He's got this talisman. He calls it wisdom. I don't know how the buffalo did the inverted commas, but it did. And I don't think we're ever going to be free as long as man's got wisdom. Oh. Well, Tiger thought this wisdom sounded like something he should have. If he could use it to control all the other animals, he wouldn't have to spend all his time every day searching and lying in wait and springing and chasing. He could just tell the animals to stand still and then he could pick them off one by one. And so he decided to speak to the man about it. He sheathed his claws. He padded over quietly to the man who was slumbering. This was ridiculous. His own paw was as big as the man's head. It must be powerful stuff, this wisdom. The tiger growled a greeting. And the man's eyes, they flickered open. And then they opened very wide indeed, and he reached for his knife, and the tiger just put one lazy paw splat on the man's arm. I don't want to kill you, you stupid creature, said the tiger. As you can see, if I'd wanted you dead, you'd be gone by now, for I am fast and fierce and gorgeous. My golden coat is the envy of all in that jungle. But I want more, and I hear that you hold something really special, something called wisdom. Now I'm going to ask you a favour, said the tiger. And while you're considering your answer, remember, I can eat you anytime I want. I would like you to get me some wisdom and give it to me. Well, the man thought fast, very fast, actually. Oh, great tiger, said the man. I can see you are fierce and fast and absolutely sensational, may I say. But I don't keep the wisdom with me. I never bring it to the field. It's back in my village. If you stay here, I will go and get you some. Oh, the tiger was very pleased by this, and he purred, I will come with you. And the man said, no, no, no. If you come back to the village, they might try and kill you. You stay here, and I will go back and bring the wisdom to you. And the tiger nodded. The man turned away and walked a couple of steps back towards the village. And then he turned back and he said, there is one thing, great tiger. I am just a little concerned that while I'm back at the village, you might actually decide to eat my water buffalo. And I do need it for my work every day. And who is going to pay me for that loss? Well, the tiger thought the buffalo did, in fact, look quite delicious and smelled even better. But he did really want this wisdom. I think, thought the tiger, that when the man comes back, I can just swipe him away with one sweep of my great paw, and then I'll eat his water buffalo anyway. And so the man came up with an idea. He said, if you allow me, I will to just keep my mind at ease, would you mind if I wrapped the ropes around you and tied you to that tree just while I go and get the wisdom? And when I come back, I will release you and I will give you the wisdom. And the tiger decided this wisdom stuff was worth the risk. And so he allowed the man to wrap the ropes around and around his beautiful golden orange coat. And he tied him tight to the tree. And the tiger settled down and waited with his mouth watering, anticipating the feast to come. And the man went off to the village as quickly as he could, and he gathered up the most enormous armfuls of dry straw, and he brought them back and he spread them on the floor underneath the tiger, and he set it alight. And the tiger roared with rage. It roared so loud that there were clouds of birds miles away that took flight in fear. And no, the man would not release him, no matter how he raged and roared, and the fire burned brightly. And the man just stood and watched. Here is my wisdom, said the man. And the fire burned fierce and hot and scorched the tiger all over, turning his beautiful fur dark burnt orange. And the ropes that bound him eventually burst into flame and scorched his flesh. And as they fell away, the tiger took off and went for the river. And those wounds did eventually heal. But the scars didn't. And that's why from that day to this, all tigers have the black stripes to remind them of man's wisdom. But they've not forgotten. And they are always, always plotting their revenge. Thank you. Now then, that was a story for the cat people. I feel we should have a story for the dog people, but I don't have a limitless supply of time, so I will give you just a tiny taster of dog story. Do you all know why dogs wander around sniffing each other's bottoms all the time? Just give me a little thumbs up if you know and a thumbs down if you don't know. I think I'll tell you the story then. I'll keep it really short. Long, long ago, dogs ruled the world, and there was a gala dinner to celebrate their magnificence, and all the dogs from all the world were invited. There were big dogs, small dogs, fat dogs, thin dogs, brown dogs, white dogs, everything, all sorts of dogs. And they went to this glittering ball, and on the way in, they called it the cloakroom, because back in those days, what you had to do when you went to a glittering ball is you would deposit things in the cloakroom, and the dogs deposited their tails with the girly dog in the cloakroom, and she hung them all up, and she gave them all tags to go with their tails. And of course they all lost the tickets, but anyway, they went into the glitter ball. They had a whale of a time. They were dancing all night. They were tippling on all sorts of things. They were eating dog treats by the handful, until somebody, I think it might have been Coyote myself, he set off the fire alarm. It was absolute pandemonium. The dogs were going wild. They were running round and round the ballroom. They were jumping up and down the walls. They were climbing over the tables and the chairs. And they scrambled. They all scrambled to get out. And on the way past the cloakroom, they all just grabbed the first tail they could see and ran off into the night with it. But they all grabbed the wrong tails. And that is why whenever you see dogs meeting each other, they go and have a little... because they're forever trying to find their own tail. Now then, I'm going to ask you, not yet, calm down. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourselves in a little bit, because I'm going to give you a little riddle now. Are you ready for a riddle? Yes, you are. Excellent. So, alive without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, always drinking, all in male, but never clinking. What am I? So you can unmute yourself and shout at me. Oh, I've got mimes. I've got miming going on.
Fish.
Excellent. It is indeed fish.
Fish.
I love that breath. As cold as never
Fish.
thirsty.
Not fish. Is it a fish?
All thinking, and it was indeed a fish. I do believe the gold star goes to John Rowe, and there was somebody else as well. Oh, Richard York, I think it was. He was doing it. Was he not?
I was
No,
asked
it was.
to say it again because I missed it.
No, Richard, you're so honest.
Yeah. I've got fish for my tea.
Has he got any radishes with it though, Dave?
Radishes with fish.
I've got radishes in my salad.
Now then, moving on.
What was the answer?
Fish.
Oh. I'm going to try it radishes now.
Right, mute yourselves. This is getting just out of hand now. It's getting out of hand. Mute yourselves back up. We're going to move on to the next bit. Now, I did say I was a zoologist, and this story session mentions lion taming. So really, I suppose I should explain that a little bit. And if you're very good, I will actually show you the photographs later on. But it's not a tall tale. I did actually do a little bit of lion taming. I'll tell you about that later. I did my degree in zoology in Manchester, and I had a fear of an animal, which actually made things quite difficult. Now, there are lots of different animals. If I asked you all what your favourite animal was, in fact, since you're so good at miming, I'm going to look at you miming your favourite animal now. Just do anything. Just show me what your favourite animal looks like. Oh, cats, birds, or butterflies. Oh my God, this is brilliant. There's a whole screen of civilized English people making fools of themselves. Is that a rabbit? I'm not sure. A hare? A dog? A hare? Excellent. Rabbit. People are getting very carried away. We best move on. So there was a whole selection of different things there. Now, if I was to ask you what your fear was, what your animal that you were most afraid of, I think we would probably get a much narrower range of animals. So there are some fears of animals that are so common throughout the world that we think it might be some sort of inherited fear. So lots of people are afraid of spiders. We've got arachnophobia. We have yes, there are spiders there. We have people who are afraid of moths. We have people who are afraid of snakes, sharks, tigers. Snakes, sharks, tigers, very reasonable fears. Moths, spiders, teeny tiny itty bitty things that can't really hurt us. Grow up. No, I'm kidding. I know some people are very frightened. Anyway, I myself was very frightened of an animal when I was at university, and it made it very difficult to do the lab work. And as I tell you my next story, let's see if you can figure out which animal it was. I'm just going to have a swift swig. Long, long ago, on the sun-kissed shores of the Mediterranean Sea, oh, do you remember when we used to be able to do things like that? There lived a girl, and this girl, she had a talent, a real skill actually. She was a weaver. And I'm telling you, watching this girl work in wool was like watching somebody dancing. She was a real master crafts person. And she would take the raw wool and she would spin it and weave it, and spin and weave and spin and weave. And oh, the cloth she produced. The colours were so vibrant, and it was so soft and so fluid and so supple and warm, beautiful cloth. She painted as she wove, really. She painted pictures on a loom. That's what she did. And she was so good that there were always a crowd of people around her, and they would stand around her and they would watch as she worked, because this was really an artist in action. She was fabulous. And she heard so much praise that her pride began to inflate. and she lost her humility. And people would stand around as they watched her, and they would gossip, as we do, and they would say, "That's a gift from the gods, that is, isn't it?" And they'd say, I think it was Athena. I think Athena taught her. There's no way she's learned to do that on her own, is there? Anyway, when the girl heard this, contrary to what you would think she would do, in other words, be flattered, she wasn't at all flattered, because she wanted all of the praise for her skills for herself. And so she became incredibly boastful. And she started to say things like, I've not learned anything from the goddess. I've learned this myself. In fact, between you and I, if Athena was to come down and challenge me to a weaving competition now, I would wipe the floor with her. She was quite tough, this girl. And word spread, and it spread so far that it actually reached the ear of Athena herself, and she was not best pleased. She disguised herself as an old woman with grey hair and arthritic fingers, and she made her way down to earth from Mount Olympus, and she found the girl in the middle of a circle of admiring maidens and matrons. And she watched her for a while. And when she'd finished and people had clapped, the old woman that was Athena said to her, "Now, if you'll take my advice," she said, "just don't worry about saying that you haven't got any mortals to rival you in the world of weaving and spinning. But if I were you, I wouldn't say that you were better than the goddess. In fact, take the advice of an old woman. Get yourself off to the temple, make some offerings, and beg her forgiveness." And the girl looked at the old crabbed woman and she said, "What do you know, old woman? You've been alive too long already. I am better than Athena. In fact, where is she? If she was so good at weaving, wouldn't she have picked up my challenge and come down to compete against me? I don't see her anywhere, do you?" And the old woman stood up, and the age fell away from her like the blossom from a tree. She was transformed and she radiated sunshine. "I am here," said Athena. And everyone else fell to their knees, but not the girl. She was absolutely adamant she wanted a competition, and so her wish was granted, and the two looms were set. And they spread their webs across the looms, and they began to weave. They chose their colours and bent their heads to the task. The girl picked up her wool dyed with madders and ochres and earth. But Athena, she reached up to the very edge of heaven and she picked a thread from the sky itself and used the blue. She bent down to the earth and she lifted up the browns and the ochres and the greens, and she used them to weave. She took the yellow from the sunshine, she took the white from the clouds, and she even pricked her own finger for the crimson of divine blood. And she wove. And Athena's work was astounding. She created a picture that was so vibrant. The colours glowed. And it was showing the gods in all their glory. There was Zeus throwing his thunderbolts. There was Poseidon riding across the waves. There was Apollo travelling across the heavens in his carriage. It was just, and the girls' work, even though it was woven from earthly dyes and colours, that was also magnificent. In fact, the pictures that it showed the gods in a different light entirely. Such greed, such violence, such anger and injustice. And she threaded it through every stitch in that weaving. And on the borders around the edges of the girls' woven work were depictions of mere mortals triumphing over the gods. Well, Athena tried very hard to find fault with the girls' work, but she couldn't find it, and the audience around them decided that the girls' weaving was actually more magnificent than that of Athena. And Athena stood up and picked up the girls' woven work and held it up for everyone to see. And she shredded it to pieces. She tore it to pieces that fluttered to the floor. And she got her shuttle and she hit the girl with it. And the girl began to shrink. Her body and her head shrunk down and down and down and became darker as black hairs sprouted across the whole of her body. Her fingers, her 4 beautiful, skilled fingers, drew in towards her body and grew long and black and thin. Eyes opened up on her forehead. And she shrieked and shrieked as she shrank and shrank and shrank until she was so tiny. Nobody could even hear her voice anymore. And then Athena picked her up and she carried Arachne across to a bush. And she left her there to spin and weave and spin and weave and spin and weave forever. It was. Did you guess the animal? Can you do me a quick mime of the animal, which it was I was terrified of? Lots of spiders, 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 spiders. Yes, I was absolutely petrified of spiders, which when you're a zoologist and you're studying spiders makes life a little bit tricky. But I wasn't frightened of them when I was small. It was obviously a learnt behaviour and I decided to unlearn it. So what I did was I specialised in spiders. So I caught them, I handled them, I made sure I handled them, I identified them, I drew them, I studied them in such detail. I know all sorts of interesting facts about spiders, some of which would make your hair curl. Oh, anyway. The other thing that I was really frightened about was slugs, not snails, slugs. And I've no idea what the problem is between the two. I don't know why it's one and not the other, but I thought, right, okay, I've worked out the spider phobia, I'll do the same thing for slugs. So I caught them, quite easy to catch. I handled them, I examined them, I identified them, I drew them, I went into detail. I know all about their anatomy, I know about their habitats, everything. Do you think it helped? No, not at all. Don't bring any slugs near me. Melissa's dying to tell me a funny story about this, but later. However, I did find out some really interesting facts about slugs as well, particularly to do with their love lives. They use calcareous spicules or love darts. Too much detail for now. Moving on very quickly. That was one of the more interesting units that I studied, was animal behaviour, and this is going to lead me into my next story, which is slightly spicy and quite interesting. If you have any young people, you may wish to stick your fingers in their ears or move out of the room. Anyway, Asgard. I'm taking you to Asgard. The Norse gods live in this vast, shining citadel at the top of the Tree of Life, except it's not a vast, shining citadel at the moment. It's a pile of rubble because there's been nothing but fights and feuds and wars, and they've just finished a particularly arduous war with the frost giants, which is another story again. But anyway, their city was in desperate needing of fortification. They needed a wall around their city. The guard part of the name Asgard refers to a wall, and it had been destroyed, and they needed a new wall, and they needed it fast. And one afternoon, across the Rainbow Bridge, there came riding a vast man, seated on the back of a huge black stallion. And the builder, the man was a builder, he rode up to them and he demanded audience. And he told Odin that he would be able to create for them a wall that was so high and so strong and so magical that it would stop anyone who wished them ill from entering. And all he required in exchange for this was the sun from the sky, the moon from the sky, and the hand in marriage of Freya, the most beautiful of goddesses. Not much of a deal, really. And Freya was particularly unimpressed by that bargain. She really didn't want to be involved in this at all. Nonetheless, the gods discussed it. They were in a bit of a pickle. And Loki, the trickster, that shape-shifting trickster, came up with a solution. Right, he said, what we'll do is we'll tell him that instead of the 3 seasons that he said he needed to build the wall, he has to have it done in just 1. And we will tell him that he can't have any help from any man. Well, he's not going to be able to do it, is he? But in the meantime, he might have built quite a lot of the wall for us to be getting started with. And so the deal was struck. And as soon as the builder had been given his commission, he stalked out of the hall and began his work. And that man, my goodness, he worked hard. They looked at him the next day and they giggled and laughed at him because they'd hoodwinked him. And then the following day, when they saw how much of that wall had been made, they weren't laughing anymore. And the day after that, they were starting to worry. Because not only was he the most phenomenal worker, he seemed to work without rest every hour of the day and night, but his horse, his vast horse, could pull almost as much as he could. And every day they would go off through the forest and into the quarry, and they would come back dragging a net full of vast stones, and the man would chip them and shape them and put them together like the pieces of a jigsaw to make this phenomenal, and it has to be said it was phenomenal, he would make this wall. And it was coming towards the end of winter, and he had to be finished by the first day of spring, and actually there were 3 days left, and it looked as if he was going to finish. There was only a little bit of work left to do around the gate. And so what do you do when a plan goes wrong? Well, you blame the person who came up with the idea in the first place. And Loki was dragged before the gods and told that if he didn't fix this situation, and off he went. Off he went on pain of death to fix the situation. Well, that evening, the builder was making his way through the forest on the back of his black stallion again. It was a cold night and you could see the stars shining on the velvety sky. So cold that you could see the air coming out of the horse's nostrils. And they were plodding along through that silent wood when the horse stopped stock still, and its ears flicked up and it sniffed. And there on the path in front of him, there appeared a mare, and it snickered and whinnied. And it came out on the path in front of him, this mare, and it trotted towards him. And then it turned around and shook its tail at him. Well, that was it. The horse was off. The stallion reared up. It threw the builder off its back, and it was off pell-mell through the snow. He just managed to grab hold of the reins, and he was being pulled along through the snow by this vast stallion. He just about managed to wedge his feet behind a stone, and he was heaving for all he was worth, and then the reins went, and off that black stallion went. Well, he didn't appear the next day. And by the following evening, the builder knew somehow that he'd been tricked. He couldn't quite put his finger on what had happened, but he knew he'd been tricked. And he was enraged because there was no way that he could finish that wall. And he was enraged. He was really angry. He was so angry, he began smashing the wall to pieces. All that hard work he put into it, he smashed it to smithereens. He was getting really carried away, and the gods were watching him thinking, that looks like familiar behaviour. He was a frost giant. He was a frost giant, and he built a wall into their city, no doubt including lots of secret passageways and weaknesses. So they got Thor on the job, who handled things in a particularly Thor-like fashion, and he smashed the frost giant's heads into 1,000,000 pieces. But what of the stallion? Well, all that night, the stallion thundered through those woods, chasing after that beautiful grey mare. And he ran until he felt like his heart would burst. And the grey mare ran for her life. And eventually the black stallion caught up with her in a clearing. And as the grey mare stood there panting, realising that she couldn't move another step, Loki looked out from behind her eyes. Because as you might have guessed, Loki, that shape-shifting trickster, had transformed himself into the grey mare to distract the stallion, and he had distracted the stallion. But as that stallion advanced upon him, he was wondering if he might have bitten off a bit too much. It pawed the ground. It advanced towards her, and it leapt onto her back, and it stuck. Anyway, we'll draw a calm veil over that. You can use your own imaginations. Loki needed to be rewarded for the service that he'd done, but he was nowhere to be found. And in fact, he was nowhere to be found for several months after. And then eventually, he came back into town. And he was bringing behind him a foal, a grey foal with 8 legs. Rather unusual foal that he'd given birth to several weeks before. And that 8-legged foal became Sleipnir, Odin's shamanic horse, the most famous horse in the whole of Norse mythology. But what a parentage to have. Now then, I'm just looking at my time, and I've got about 5 minutes, which might be a little bit small to get through my next story. How are we doing for time? Are we allowed to do one more story? Bianca,
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
I might go a couple of minutes over. If I do, don't and you have to leave.
No, it's fine. We can stay longer.
Okay. Okay. Right then. I'm going to finish off with a lovely story that was given to me by Taffy Thomas. I went up to see him in Manchester, and I really enjoyed this story. And he said, "You can tell that story. It's your story. Just tell everyone where you got it from." So this one is from Taffy Thomas, and it's about, well, it's about birds. Oh, look, teacher, visual aids. I have brought my beautiful feather with me. And it's also about eggs and nests. This is one of my favourite bits of treasure. I don't know if you can see this. But that is a real nest that I found one day on the towpath. I don't know what happened to its original owners, but look how beautifully padded it is and carefully woven. So this is the story about how birds were created. The time had come for Mother Nature to create birds, and the tree of life was covered, every branch was covered with nests. There were messy nests and tidy nests. There were tiny nests and giant nests. But in every single nest, there was a clutch of eggs. Oh, they were every shade. There were blue eggs, white eggs, browny pink eggs. There were speckled eggs. There were squiggly lined eggs. They were tiny. They were big, giant eggs. All sorts of eggs. And then there was a tap, tap, tapping as they all began to hatch at the same time. And from those eggs came all the birds, and they were every shade of colour in there. Actually, they were brown, all of them, every single one. Not even a really interesting brown, not chestnut or anything like that, just brown. And Mother Nature looked at that and thought, oh, you know, when you've tried really hard on a job and it's just not turned out the way you want. And she realised this wouldn't do. Because how are they going to find their flocks? How are they going to find their families? How are they going to find their mates? So she had to fix it. So she told them all to line up at the bottom of the tree of life, and she called them forward, one or two at a time. She rummaged around in a handbag. Ladies, we understand this. At the bottom of your handbag, there is always just what you need, but it's always right at the very bottom. And she rummaged and rummaged and rummaged and pulled out her paint box. And then she rummaged and rummaged and rummaged again and pulled out her paintbrush. And she called the first few birds up. And the first two birds that come up were about this big. And they were brown. And she thought for a minute. And she dipped her brush into the yellow, a very vibrant yellow. It was beautiful. And ever so carefully, she just painted the beak of one of the birds. And then she dipped her brush again. And ever so carefully, she painted a circle around that bird's eye. And then she painted the whole of its body black. And she left the other bird brown. Now, I'm going to look and see if you're miming this at me or mouthing it at me. She just made the very first pair of... That's right, she just made the very first pair of blackbirds. And off they hopped and started to sing. There's one singing for me right now outside. And she called forward the next pair of birds. These were much bigger. They had very long tails. They're about this long altogether. And she used some more black, and she painted them the bluest of blacks, and she painted them the creamiest of whites. And these were really cheeky birds. They had a real twinkle in their eye and a lot of personality. And because they had so much personality, she gave them a bit of zhuzh. And on their long tail feathers, she painted an iridescent pink and a purple and a green. And that was the very first pair of magpies. And they flew off into a tree and started making a right racket. She was quite proud of that one. She could paint, who knew? So, let's get down to it, she thought. And she called forward a bird that had a very long, strong beak and a very short tail. And she dipped her paintbrush into the red and she painted the top of its head, I think it was. She painted it red. Then there was a bit of green, a few little spots. She got quite carried away on this one. And that one, when it had finished, she watched it fly off and it started to peck the branches of the trees. In fact, it pecked the tree trunk. I think it was looking for insects. And that was the very first woodpecker. She was so impressed. She could paint anything. She was ready for something simple though. And the next little bird was a tiny bird, brown bird. And this was really easy. She just painted its breast and she just painted it a beautiful red. Now you can all shout this at the screen at once. She painted the very first robin. And that one cocked its little head on one side and fixed her with its beady black eye and then ran off to try and catch some toast crumbs, I think it was. But why should the little ones be plain, she thought. And the next ones had a blue cap and a yellow belly. They were the very first blue tits. Well, she was off. She was having a whale of a time. She painted the kingfishers a royal blue. She scattered stars across the starling's breast. She discovered polka dots. Oh, she enjoyed polka dots and she went mad on the guinea fowl. And then she discovered stripes, zebra finches, puffin beaks. In fact, between you and I, that was getting a bit embarrassing actually. And the blue-footed booby was just a moment of sheer madness, but nonetheless, she was enjoying herself. And she painted all day, and as the sun began to set, she was absolutely exhausted, but she only had one little bird left. It was a little brown thing, and it hopped up, all excited, very hopeful. Wonder what I'm going to get. And she smiled down at it, and she picked a paintbrush up, and she looked down at her paint palette. She'd used all her paint up. There was nothing left. And this poor little bird was looking at her in such a hopeful way. There was a tiny scrap, one tiny little scrap left of gold. That was all there was, not enough to do anything with, really. She sharpened her paintbrush, as we artists do. and she picked up the last scrap of gold, and then she whispered into the ear of the little brown bird, and it opened its mouth as wide as it could for her, and ever so carefully she put the drop of gold paint onto its tongue. And that little brown bird flew up, and it flew higher and higher and higher until it was almost touching the heavens. And then it opened its mouth and began to sing. And the skylark soars above the heavens over moorlands and meadows every summer. It might not be very colourful, but it definitely has a golden tongue. I particularly love that little story, and I'm very grateful for Taffy Thomas for sharing it with me. I think that brings us to the end of our time together, and I would just like
so
to...
it sort of does, but if anyone's got any questions, well, first of all, thank you for that.
Thank
beautiful. Let's have a round of applause for that
Please
fantastic.
unmute yourself.
Yeah, and if anyone's got any questions or comments, you know, for Maria, please ask. Please ask.
I have actually got one more riddle. Would you like it?
Yes.
Oh, let's have a riddle.
This is a really easy one, and it was supposed to come before the last story, but I didn't think we'd have time. Are you ready? Drum roll, please. A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. So it's nice and easy. Shout it out at me if you know it. A box without hinges, key or lid, and yet gold.
It's an
inside.
egg.
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 Lime egg, but I didn't quite know how we'd do that one. So there you go.
Oh.
Thank you all very much for.
So have you managed to have you managed to earn money from your zoology, or just or having done the course?
I've got a degree in zoology, and the main reason that I did a science-based degree was I wanted to be a science teacher. So I was a science teacher for quite a while. Well, I am a science teacher, but I was working within schools for a while.
I'm a belly dancing teacher.
Those are my wings of Isis. I did a sideways step into belly dancing, and those are my wings of Isis. They're making me want to dance, but I'm not doing that now. But yes, I did do it. I was a zoologist for a living, as it were, but I wasn't a zookeeper. Everyone thinks that's all you can do with a zoology degree. The things that I found out, and the love that it instilled in me for the natural world was just worth. I couldn't believe it was in the days when you got grants, and I couldn't believe that I got a grant to go and study this subject that I loved so much. And it was, we had all sorts of adventures.
She did
field trip. Weird and wonderful things happened. It was great.
Oh. Fantastic.
I particularly enjoyed your bird story. It's very you.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
It
It ticks all the boxes, that one. It's a story. It's about animals, and it's got painting in it.
Well, thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I just in case at 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and it's live tomorrow because our teller is in India, and if I put her on at 6 o'clock, it would be the middle of the night in India. But if you're supposed to be at a Zoom meeting at 2 o'clock tomorrow, put it off. Pretend you're ill. Right, and if it's raining outside, watch it on your laptop. If it's sunny outside, take your tablet out or your phone and watch it on that. But at 2 o'clock, for the first time on the World Storytelling Cafe, we've got Jiba Raghunath. And the disadvantage of being a compare that has never spoken to the people is that you have no idea whether you're pronouncing their names properly, because all you are is reading them. But that's my guess, and we'll find out tomorrow whether I got it anywhere near right.
I'm sure they'll forgive me.
But she is live at 2, and at 6. I'm not running through the whole week. I'm just doing tomorrow. But at 6, there's we're showing Kath Little's set again. That was that we put on at the weekend, because it is beautiful, and we put it on at 2 o'clock. So this is although in reality you can go and find any of the sets on Catch Up, but we like to bring them. We like to put it, in your lap, so to speak, occasionally, so you don't have to do any research whatsoever. So we've and Kath did this beautiful set, which is definitely worth it. If you've seen it before, watch it again. But right now we can thank you all for coming and give Maria a huge final round of applause.
Thank you, Maria.
That was
Thank
lovely.
you.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Thank you, Mia.
Oh, and now there is one more little thing, but on the Zoom you don't see it. But if you go back to the site, you will see a little top hat. Now, because we're not earning at the moment, and we would normally be out gigging for enormous quantities of money, in fact, phenomenal quantities of money, we are contenting ourselves with much smaller quantities of money, which we click. This is like having the hat down or in the street. So anything you can drop into that, I'm sure Maria would be, she can buy bread and cheese and go out and feed the birds or something. But thank you very much, and pop a penny in the hat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Coming
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Maria.
Bye bye.
Bye.